Call to order this meeting of the Legislative Audit Commission. It is April 7th, 2025, 9 a.m. Clerk will take the roll.
Senator Rest,
Present.
Representative Anderson, Representative Anderson, Senator Barr,
Here.
Senator Dibble, Senator Dibble, Senator Drazkowski, Senator Drazkowski, Representative Greenman, Representative Greenman, Representative Hanson, Representative
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Oh, yep. Okay. Representative
Here.
Jacob,
Jacob here.
Senator Karan,
Oh, she's gonna bring your stuff over here.
Senator Karan, Representative Lee, Representative Lee, Representative Quam.
Present.
That completes, or, oops, sorry, Senator Zhang. Senator Zhang. That completes the roll. We have 6 members present at the moment.
Thank you very much. We do not have a quorum. Quorum is not necessary in order to receive a report. Today, we are going to hear from the Deputy Legislative Auditor and the Audit Director for this report on the Metropolitan Council Southwest Light Rail Transit construction. Ms. Lyson, if you would identify yourself for the record, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Lori Lyson. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for the Financial Audit Division at the Office of the Legislative Auditor. Before I begin the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the auditors who worked on this audit. We have Ms. Borneman, who oversaw the audit, and then our auditors, Tyler Billig, Kelly Lair, Alec Mickelson, and Dylan Harris. So just to familiarize yourself with what our office has released prior, we released 3 reports. We had 1 special review and we had 3 program evaluations prior to this audit. Those really looked at the budget, project, and timeline, the council's decision-making, and then the council's oversight of contractors. And in comparison, this audit is really focused on specific Southwest Light Rail construction activities as overseen by the Metropolitan Council and then performed by the civil construction contractor, Lunda CS McCrossan, which I'll refer to as Lunda McCrossan going forward, and then their subcontractors and suppliers. So the original contract amount between the council and Lunda McCrossan was approximately $8 million. And as of March 31st of 2023, the Metropolitan Council executed about 630 change orders, which totaled approximately $228 million as of March 31st. So this brought the total contract amount to just over $1 billion. Then Lunda McCrossan will also receive up to an additional $285 million as part of a settlement agreement. And this was to address compensation for project delays and unresolved change orders. So the total contract with the settlement amount is just over $1.3 billion that will be paid to Lunda McCrossan and its suppliers and subcontractors. So we conducted this audit to determine whether the council and Lunda McCrossan complied with certain requirements for activities related to the Southwest Light Rail project. We also reviewed the adequacy of the council's controls over these areas. However, just to note here, we did not test the internal controls at Lunda McCrossan. So our audit period was January 1st of 2019 through March 31st of 2023. Our audit areas consisted of Lunda McCrossan's subcontractor and supplier activity. Specifically, we looked at prompt payments, at materials, quantifiable or unforeseen items. Example of that would be sales tax. We also looked at change orders, and we looked at the use of disadvantaged business enterprises. We also reviewed contaminated soil disposal and physical security of their laydown areas. Laydown areas here are the locations where the contractor, in this case London McCrossan, stores their materials and their equipment. So in conclusion, we found that the Metropolitan Council had instances of noncompliance and weaknesses in internal controls in the areas of change order, disadvantaged business enterprises, contaminated soils, and the monitoring over the physical security. And then in addition, we found that London McCrossan had instances of noncompliance in the areas of disadvantaged business enterprises and physical security. Our report contains 5 findings. So this first area is about change orders. So in our testing of change orders, we found that the council did not apply a consistent variance threshold or establish guidance when comparing its change order cost estimates against London McCrossan's estimates. So for the change orders we tested, we found that the council accepted a wide range of variances in estimates when approving their change orders and determining whether costs were fair and reasonable. So I'm going to walk you through a change order process once the decision has been made that a change order is needed. And I'm going to use the first row of data on this slide, which you can also find on page 15 of the report in Exhibit 5. So first, the Met Council and London McCrossan, and I should say for Met Council, it could also be their independent cost estimating consultant. And then London McCrossan are going to create cost estimates independent from each other, right? So there's going to be 2 initial estimates here. And that in the first row of this data here, that first estimate for Met Council was 37 million, and the estimate for London McCrossan was 83 million. So as you can see here, we have a variance of approximately $43 million. So then what happens next is that Met Council is going to review and compare the 2 estimates, and they may either require a revision of those estimates, or they may ask for additional analysis or information. So in this scenario, Met Council revised its own estimate, and then it revised it to approximately 83 million. And as you can see here, that's really in line with what London McCrossan's estimate was. So then they need to decide on what estimate to use, and they need to determine if London McCrossan's estimate is fair and reasonable. So however, as I had mentioned before, there is no guidance to determine what is fair and reasonable. And as you can see in this walkthrough, Met Council's revised estimate is really moving substantially towards London McCrossan's estimate. So what we're recommending here is that the council develop and use either a variance threshold or provide guidance when they're comparing change order estimates against the London McCrossan estimates. So the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about disadvantaged business enterprises. So when federal funds are used in a construction project, federal regulations require the state to use disadvantaged business enterprises. I'm going to refer to them as DBEs. They're small businesses that are owned by a socially or economically disadvantaged person, such as women or veterans. And we found 2 issues related to DBEs. This first issue relates to the monitoring over DBEs. And what we found here is that the council's policy requires periodic reviews of these DBEs. Those reviews consist of on-site visits, interviews, and then reviewing of pertinent information. The council said its practice is to monitor DBEs at least once before completing the project, with the attempt to complete visits annually. There's a federal requirement, and that requirement requires them to monitor, but it doesn't specify the frequency and how often they have to do those reviews and site visits. However, there is federal guidance here that recommends monitoring of DBEs early in the project in order to provide sufficient time to correct any issues. So we reviewed all monitoring visits that had occurred through March 31st of 2023, which consisted of 50 DBEs at that point in time. They had been working with 50. And we found that for 9 of those DBEs, the council did not have sufficient documentation of the monitoring visits. So what we saw is they did not complete what they call a commercially useful function review. That ensures that the DBE is actually responsible for executing the work that they have been hired to perform. We also saw that they did not complete notes or emails of those monitoring visits, and they did not obtain or review contracts and invoices. And then for an additional 12 of those 50 DBEs, what we found is that the council had not yet initiated monitoring as of March 31st of 2023. Those DBEs had started working on the project by September of 2021. So approximately a year and a half after that, we still had not seen any initiation of those monitoring visits. So according to the council, this was due to not having sufficient staff to perform those visits. And they plan to complete the visits by the time that the project is complete. However, per the federal guidance that I mentioned earlier, which again is just a recommendation, the idea really is to complete those reviews while the DBE is still working on the project. So what we're recommending here is that the council conduct and document the required monitoring visits, and that we also want the council to include requirements in its internal policy on how often and when such monitoring visits should occur. And again, this is relating to the disadvantaged business enterprises. So our second issue here is related to the DBEs, and that London McCrossin did not accurately report the use of DBEs on the project to the council. And the council did not have adequate internal controls to detect the incorrect amounts reported. So federal requirements require the council to determine the level of DBE participation for a project based on the availability of qualified DBEs. And then per the contract between the council and London McCrossin, the council set the DBE participation goal to 16% of the civil construction contract amount. So what we found here is for the 2 of 3 DBs that we tested, London McCrossin reported incorrect billing and payment amounts to the council's within the council's contract management system. And these amounts are the ones that are used to determine the participation rate here. So why did this occur? The report used to London McCrossin was not cumulative and it missed invoices. And then when the council performs a reconciliation, they're using the reported amounts with another report that is provided by London McCrossin. However, the reconciliation is not effective because you're essentially using data that is coming from the same source. And if invoices are missing in one, invoices are going to be missing in the other one. So what we're recommending here is that London McCrossin review its use of all DBEs to ensure that the amounts are accurately reported, and that they need to strengthen and then that council needs to strengthen their internal controls over its monitoring activities to ensure amounts being reported are accurate. So this next area is about the disposal of contaminated soils. Contaminated soils are soils that are polluted, they're contaminated, or they're hazardous. And due to their negative environmental impact, the council's contract with London McCrossin requires contaminated soils to be removed from the project when identified. And our finding relates to the council's monitoring over the disposal of the contaminated soils, and we found issues in the approval, the excavation, and in the payments. So for the approval, we found that the council provides pre-approved forms in bulk that are blank. This means that the forms do not contain the location of the excavation or the estimated quantity of the contaminated soils. So in summary, what that means is they're signing off on blank forms that don't contain the necessary information. And then in the excavation area, what we saw is that, again, per the contract between the council and London McCrossin, and also in the environmental consultant, this is a third-party contracted party, they have a response action plan. So in the contract and in the response action plan, it requires the environmental consultant to be present for the excavation and the hauling of the soils. However, we found that the council did not require the consultant to be present for all excavations to monitor the hauling of these soils. And in this final area, in the payment area that we tested, we reconciled contaminated soil activity to the council's payments. And what we found is the council had overpaid London McCrossin by about $330,000 as of March 31st of 2023. So due to these issues noted in our report, in our testing, we had asked the council if it had performed reconciliations or other procedures to ensure that the soils hauled were only from contaminated areas and that the amounts in tons were accurate. However, the council was not able to provide us with any other procedures. So we have several recommendations here for the council. We want to see, we recommend that they strengthen their monitoring over the disposal, that they verify the accuracy of the amounts disposed, that they make accurate payments for the disposal, and that they reconcile, at least on a sample basis, the amounts disposed of to date to ensure that those contaminated soils are actually coming from a Southwest Light Rail project site. And then finally, verify the payments to date to ensure the payments, that the amounts paid are accurate. And this final area is in the area of physical security. So the council's contract with London McCrossin requires a variety of security measures to ensure the safety of construction staff and also to safeguard the valuable materials and equipment. So for example, London McCrossin must limit and control the access to the construction site, and that they also need to submit a security plan that is reviewed by the council for inclusion in the contract. So we based our testing on the noted security measures, which included such items as video surveillance, fencing that encloses the area, screens or barriers to obstruct views, and locked gates when not in use. And what we found is that London McCrossin did not always have physical security restrictions and safeguards in place, and that the council did not adequately monitor London McCrossin's compliance with these requirements. We found security deficiencies in all 7 of the 14 active laydown areas that we tested. So there were various causes for these deficiencies. And for instance, we were told that fencing was removed to allow construction to begin in a particular area and that fencing would then be put back up. However, we don't know the length of time that fencing was down for. So we do, excuse me, we do want to note here that London McCrossin told us that it absorbs the cost of any materials and equipment that are stolen, but that's not something that we verified as part of our testing. So here we're recommending that London McCrossin ensure that it implements and adheres to security requirements that are outlined in the contract, and that the council strengthens its monitoring procedures to ensure that London McCrossin complies with contract security requirements. This concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Are there comments or questions for the legislative auditor and staff? The record will show that we have achieved a quorum. Seeing that there are none, I will ask Mr. Zelli, Chair of the Metropolitan Council, to come forward. And with him, Brian O'Connor, the Regional Administrator. Members can certainly follow along, if you will. There is, of course, the response from the Metropolitan Council at the end of the report. And there's also a letter from London McCrossin. Welcome to the commission. Mr. Zelli, if you didn't identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Charlie Zelli, Chair of the Metropolitan Council, and I'm joined by Ryan O'Connor, who's our Regional Administrator. And I have a number of comments, but I really appreciate being before you today, and also the history we have with the Office of Legislative Auditor on this project. This is not new for us, but also maybe give you a context of where this project is. And then we certainly are open and available for questions. First off, given the timing of the OLA audit at that particular period of time in the field work conducted in 2023. We're really pleased to report and verify that subsequent reconciliation has assured that there was no overpayments, and that we have followed all kind of regulatory and legal procedures. We have learned a lot from all of the OLA reviews, and I'm pleased to report that we have actually instituted a number of reforms and processes. This report identifies a number of areas where we could improve. In fact, we have revised and augmented a number of our procedures. Most importantly, as I mentioned before, there were no overpayments, and we have protected, we believe, taxpayers' interests in delivering this project. Southwest Light Rail, or we refer to as the Green Line Extension, is a generational investment in a transformative network of transit throughout this metro area. It is 85% complete. In fact, the Kenilworth Tunnel is substantially done. The project, since there was a modified budget, a rebaselining, the OLA report refers to it as a settlement. Really, since that time, several years ago, we have remained on that revised budget, and we are on course to have revenue service in 2027. I think everybody here knows, but I remind you that this is by far the largest and most complicated infrastructure mega project ever undertaken in the state of Minnesota. 29 new bridges, 2 LRT tunnels, 6 pedestrian tunnels, and over 120 retaining walls. Although we're 2 years from it opening, we can actually count on that project already being a success. There is in excess of $3 billion of permitted projects around the 16 different stations along the 14-mile alignment. Many of those are open and running, some are under construction, and some are yet to be built, but it shows the economic stimulus that this project has provided. And as previously mentioned, we're really pleased that the OLA actually covered a number of areas in great detail. And I think what is underneath that is that they have found the required documentation for payments for materials, allowances, and in many cases, change orders. And I can kind of respond to each finding briefly, but I do refer the committee to the letter where we respond in greater detail. Overall, we actually accept the feedback readily. We know that there's many areas where we can improve, and in fact, we are in the process of improving. In the area of finding one, the guidance on change order estimates, we acknowledge that there were significant variances between council and the contractor estimates on a number of occasions. We believe we have adopted a number of improvements to correct that kind of estimating process, and all these change orders have had significant scrutiny and analysis. As an example, after 2022 MnDOT peer review, we hired a new cost estimating consultant and have since received much more accurate results as a result of following MnDOT best practice. The council will continue to review its policies and will determine what other additional factors would improve transparency and effectiveness. On finding 2, regarding disadvantaged business enterprise monitoring, we're actually quite pleased with the DBE record. It accounts for 22% of the total work, which is well above the 15% goal. That's somewhere in the area of $300 million that has been invested through disadvantaged business enterprises. Although there was significant monitoring and and we have not heard or been reported any issues, we recognize the need for additional monitoring, scrutiny, and we readily accept the imperative to and recommendation guidance to increase our oversight and documentation. Regarding finding 3, tracking DBE payments, the council also agrees with the OLA recommendations. We are actually in the process of improving that kind of monitoring of payments. A new technology is being used to verify payments, which we expect to improve the speed, transparency, and accuracy. Regarding finding 4, contaminated soils, this is also the timing issue related to when the field work was done. We know that our subsequent reconciliation has assured us that there was no overpayments. We recognize the oversight and the timeliness in this area could be improved. This was, to give it better kind of context, over the 14.5 miles of the construction area, there's as many as 130,000 truckloads of contaminated soil that were hauled away. And it was a cumbersome tracking process involving carbon copies, little sheets going to different various parties. And we recognized that was not efficient and it could be tightened up. We recognize that there is an industry shift toward electronic manifests, and we are certainly recognizing the value of that. In fact, in a recent experience with our Hopkins maintenance facility, we find it much easier and more precise tracking of those contaminated loads. We're looking at other improvements, such as tracking by date rather than invoice number. It's just something that we know sounds common sense, but we're actually employing those as well. Finally, the finding 5, the site security, we also agree with the council, with the OLA. We are working with our contractors on a way to shore up security in a few of those laydown areas. We note that we have not had any reports of any stolen losses. We have not paid any liability from loss of materials. However, we take that feedback seriously, and we are looking at ways to provide and beef up our security. Those are kind of my brief overview statements. Overall, we feel very proud of this project. We think it has been professionally managed by our engineers and project management. Sometimes it is not the challenge of seeing these unforeseen conditions that caused the budget increases in this project, but it's how we dealt with them. And I'm very proud of how we dealt with those challenges in the taxpayers' interest and in the value of this project coming online soon. We will be testing trains this coming maybe toward the end of this year. So we'll see more and more activity, and we look forward to a ribbon cutting before you know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zelli. Mr. O'Connor, did you have a response as well?
Madam Chair, Ryan O'Connor, Regional Administrator, Metropolitan Council. I'll stand for questions other than just to acknowledge and appreciate the work of the OLA in working with our team through the technical process. As we went through what was a technical evaluation of many complex processes, we felt heard. We got to go back and forth to make sure we could share the information in ways that was difficult at times to understand in terms of timing. And we acknowledge that this audit took place during a point in time with a project that has continued forward since that time, which led to these challenges around reconciliation that we take seriously, and that will continue forward till the end of the project. But appreciate the work of the auditor to help us continue to improve as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Are there comments or questions from The members, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to be angry. The findings in this report are just a continuation of the 5 or 6 additional investigations and analyses that we've seen up to this point on Southwest LRT. So there's not, it's not a huge surprise that we find that I did some math here, Madam Chair, on the barrier wall. I mean, we already knew this. The amount we ended up paying
What
was
page is that
2.5
on?
times the original.
What page is that on?
I'm looking at the table on page 15. So, we see ultimately $83.5 million paid, the original estimate being almost $37 million. We see the begin construction of the barrier protection wall, an estimate at $2 million, coming in at over 5 times the amount. Modification of the wall east of Glenwood Avenue. If you take the upper estimate, that's 2.7 times the original estimate. None of these are, like I said, Madam Chair, are a big surprise. It's exactly what happens when an organization feels no pressure to be transparent, to be accountable to the public that it serves, because it doesn't report directly to a body that is accountable to that public, that has its leadership on the line in the form of elections that come from that public. And I'll just say for the record, Madam Chair, that any steps that we've attempted to make to change that, to rectify that, to make some meaningful change, whether that's better accountability up to and through this entity, the legislature, or the governor, or a directly elected entity, have been thwarted by the defenders of the status quo. And so my message isn't to the Met Council. They're defending things as they have them, because they enjoy the power that they enjoy and exercising it in the way that they do. We've tried to make changes here at the legislature, and the legislature hasn't seen fit. We've attempted to make changes at the executive branch level, and no changes have been forthcoming. And we've talked to the entire region, and there's some investment in things as the way they are. And so we will continue to get these sorts of results from this organization, because the system is performing exactly as it's designed. So really the challenge is to the public to rise up and ask for something different if they want better outcomes from this regional body. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So I guess for Chair Zelli, you stated immediately there were no overpayments, and then you reiterated there were no overpayments. The finding 4 on page 4, the Metropolitan Council did not adequately monitor the disposal of the contaminated soils. In addition, the Met Council overpaid Lunda McCrossin Joint Ventures for the disposal of contaminated soils. I don't think you can just simply take the position we don't admit that there was overpayments, when that's exactly what the report found. And I think the number was $330,000 in that particular instance. What's your plan to recover the $330,000 that was overpaid?
Mr. Zelli.
Madam Chair, Representative, the point was at that particular point in time in 2023, when the field work was done by the OLA, and I don't, we understand that 300,000 was yet to be identified as an actual cost. So it was viewed as an overpayment. But in subsequent periods of time, each load and invoice was verified and reconciled, kind of like balancing a checkbook. Those were identified as actual payments that went for services rendered. So we will stand by the fact that once that reconciliation was conducted, there were no overpayments. Do you want to?
Representative Jacob.
Well, apparently we don't have agreement from the findings. Second question for you. these estimates, one at 82,000, your estimate at 36,000, with a variance of 40, I'm sorry, million, 82 million, and your estimate of 36 million for a variance of 45 million. I mean, generally in business, when there's that kind of overrun or disparity, that's not fair to other contractors who would have bid on this and quite likely would have came in somewhere between the 36 and 82 million. How do you justify just raising your estimate actually to above their estimate? How do you justify that?
Mr. Zelli.
Madam Chair, Representative, that initial estimate was before all the scope and the actual engineering of that passenger protection barrier was fully completed. This was a change order in the project, and I think the OLA has made a comment that we should have included this in the initial bidding of the entire project. But because of the delays caused by negotiating with the railroad, the city of Minneapolis, even MnDOT, that got delayed to a point where had we waited for the overall bidding of the entire project, the delay itself would have caused even greater costs to taxpayers. So this initial estimate didn't fully capture the full kind of scope of that project. We believe we had a much more accurate understanding once it was fully complied, and the contractor, after a thorough analysis, the contractor's costs and our own revised estimate was a much more accurate. In my years of business, I understand and the importance of meeting budgets and how you have to really be able to fully understand the costs of any project. But one of the decisions was to move forward with the project and deal with this very large element with a change order. And unfortunately, those initial estimates were not really fully capturing what was all entailed in that very large project.
Madam Chair, if I could add one final piece, Representative, appreciate the comments. On the piece specifically around procurement methods utilized, we agree that the methods used to procure this project at the outset would be better served using different procurement methods that have now become statutorily available to the council since the beginning of this project. And we would use different, more complex procurement methods going forward in the future to move away from a simple low bid process for some of the reasons that you cited here.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say what I'm hearing is essentially a $45 million mistake and not put out for rebidding, just completely unacceptable. So.
Thank you. Representative Hansen is online. He has a question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to validate Senator Dibble's comments. He is not a lonely voice crying in the wilderness. We see that there are needs for reform and modernization with the Metropolitan Council. Having sat through several of these, there's always a rationale or an excuse. I do appreciate that the project is nearing completion, but reform is necessary, even incremental reform on how the council does business or how it's structured. And it's unfortunate, as Senator Dibble had mentioned, that those discussions seem to be, we've had task forces, we've had reports, we've had studies, we've had bills, we've had hearings, but the status quo is extremely resilient. So I just want to add my voice to his, that he is not alone. Others see it, and we need to continue to work for reform and modernization and updating to be accountable to the people of Minnesota.
Thank you. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chairman Zelli, not Commissioner anymore. Chairman, I'm, I'm digging through, unintended, Mr. Chairman, the contaminated soils section on page 25, and I mean, I was taken aback by what the auditor said about the behavior here of the council and trying to figure out what happened. And as I read through here, by the way, I was about 14 years old and my dad was a township chair, town of Buffalo in Wisconsin, okay? And 14. And so my relief from the farm that day, so I didn't have to work on the farm, was I got to sit at the corner where the dump trucks came and dumped their crushed rock on the road that was being worked on behalf of the township. I counted the loads. My job was to sit there and tally the loads. There's a load. There's a tally. By the end of the day, then, the township knew that they got what they were paying for. And that was a budget of, I don't know, maybe $10,000 or $20,000 at the time. Here we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. As I read this contaminated soil section, and the auditor testified that, and it's included in the report here, that you had one of your representatives actually simply sign the manifest? To simply sign the manifest, so you had a wad of approval sheets that said that these were truckloads that your person saw going out. That was me on the corner at the time, right? That was your guy or gal that was doing what I was doing then. You had a sign, instead of tallies, you had a bunch of sheets, one for each load, I assume. And you, and so I think we got a distraction. We're working on it. And so, Mr. Chairman, your people signed the slips, they were blank, and handed them over to the general contractor, I think, right? And those are the slips that were to be reconciled against the landfill and what they were billing in the end. And not to mention that you handed the slips to them with the signature on approving them and validating them before the information about where they were coming from, how many loads, how, was it contaminated material or not, before that was even added to the slip. It was already approved. So not only to mention that, but you were supposed to use those slips then to reconcile against what the government was being billed by the landfill. And that didn't happen, according to the audit report. And as I read on top of 25, furthermore, the council's internal payment request policy requires a council authorized representative to review the accuracy of London McCrossin payment request to certify that the goods and services have been received by the council. So in doing this willy-nilly approach to accounting and making certain that we are getting what we paid for, because there wasn't any certainty and we were getting what we were paid for, you are violating your own rules, your own policy. So I'm wondering if you can describe, Mr. Chairman, first of all, why and how you still come to the conclusion that we paid exactly what we paid for. Well, of course, we're just paying the bill that the disposal site gives us. Well, we didn't ensure that that's exactly what went out, which was what our policy said we're supposed to do. So help us here.
Chairman Zelli.
Madam Chair, Senator, as I started saying, there's no question that the whole oversight and monitoring process and documentation could be improved, should be improved, needs to be improved, and we taken steps to do that. But, and I don't want to leave the impression that all carbon copies and truckloads weren't monitored. Were some instances, as you described, but it's our belief and our management team's representation that that amount that's given that had not yet been reconciled was reconciled with actual hauling that was done. You know, it was a complicated, there's, as I said, as many as 130,000 truckloads over a course of several years. It's not just an issue of the number of truckloads, but, you know, making sure that they're not mixed up with other projects to ensure that they truly are contaminated, where they're actually going. So we recognize and take at heart the need to tighten that process, and we believe we've taken steps to do that.
So, Madam Chair.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Chairman, so you admit that you didn't keep track of and reconcile properly the loads, but we paid the right amount. You can't have both there. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So don't be giving us that. How can you know? How can anyone know? They can't. And we don't know. So just say that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Zelli, what was the original bid when you came to the legislature back in 2017, 18, when this project, before you stuck the first shovel in the ground? What was the estimate for the entire Southwest Light Rail project?
When the project contracts were signed initially during the groundbreaking, it was $2 billion.
2 billion?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was a little less than that.
No.
Okay, so
The full funding agreement with the federal
Gentlemen, you need to
government
go through
was
the chair.
approximately $2 billion. Sorry, Madam Chair. It's the standard.
Senator Barr.
he can finish. Madam Chair, Chair Zelli was gonna, but if
Is he
he could,
responding to
please.
your question? Mr. Zelli, continue.
Madam Chair, sorry, Senator, that was the full funding agreement was $2 billion.
Now, Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Zelli. So this is, we have a whole bunch of this going on today, dinging and ringing. So just in the second paragraph of your response in the report here, isn't it just a little bit disingenuous to say that you're on budget at 2.86 billion?
Mr. Zelli.
Madam Chair, Senator, at getting into the project, recognized in addition to the corridor protection barrier, the wall we previously were discussing, the soil conditions of the tunnel, a number of other delays caused by that tunnel, initiated a process where we brought in some outside national experts to work with the contractors to re-baseline, in other words, to actually re-sequence how the project would be built, entered into ultimately a very long negotiated process to ensure that the project actually didn't stop, but would do it more efficiently had we just followed the initial phasing process. So that resulted ultimately in the $2.86 billion budget, which when I'm saying after that major correction several years ago, that it has been on course since that time, and that we have been on that 2027 service date since that time. It was not the initial expectation. When I had been asked, I will certainly say that this project was never a $2 billion project. It was under budgeted for what the true cost is. But having said that, to be less than 200 million miles per mile for a major light rail project in the United States at this time is very competitive, and we believe stands well compared to its other peer projects around the country.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Zelli. I've been around here a while now, more than a couple of years, and I have never seen anything positive, any reports positive about the Met Council. This is your third light rail line, and all three of them have come in extremely over budget. I won't go so far as to use the L word, but it's extremely disingenuous for the Met Council to come to the legislature and on a third project say that you have missed your bid so far, and then you update it after you've gotten the approval, after it's half built, and after you've run into problems that were identified before the project started with the tunnel and the separation wall from Burlington Rail. All of that was identified before the first shovel of dirt was tossed. So I find it there's a big problem in the Met Council, the way they conduct business, spending other people's money. People went to work every day, worked hard for this, and the Met Council on all three of your light rail projects has come in so far over budget. It's like you don't care. And I want to echo Senator Dibble's comments about until we do major reform in the Met Council and how it does its business and what business it actually does and is responsible for, I don't believe this will change. So with that, thank you,
Thank
Madam
you,
Chair.
Senator Barr. Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I want to follow up. Well, there's a million things to follow up on because it's a disaster. So, but 130,000 truckloads. Did every one of the, you said you were using carbon copy paper for these. These are the pre-approved forms that you just hand to them and their carbon. Was there 130,000 pieces of carbon copy paper? Was it one per truckload, or how did that work?
Mr.
Madam
Zilli?
Chair, Senator, Representative Anderson, I can't speak to whether it was actual carbon per truck. That is my understanding. There might have been a number of copies from each manifest, and they would be distributed for each truck in different places. I described that to describe how complicated it is, and our challenge to simplify it and make it more accurate.
Representative Anderson.
You said they were carbon copies, and then, so were they carbon copy pieces of paper? And then you said later you actually started using a computer, electronics. Is that accurate?
Mr. Zilli.
Madam Chair, Representative, yes, I think we're finding ways to both simplify it and to make it more accurate to stay on top in real time. And part of that is the electronic manifests do that. And we're finding those places where we haul these loads had to accept electronic. So part of it is not just our use, it's getting those landfills to be able to be kind of in tune with that. And my understanding is that is something that is the industry is moving toward. We have had good experience recently by doing that. And so we maybe in future, and certainly we're learning future projects, which, and for the record, I do not believe the first two light rail lines were over budget or late. So this is something that is, and this large mega project has happened, but we have taken measures, we believe, to correct it. And I'm more describing that carbon copy to show you how those kind of errors could occur. And so we want to stop that.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. So where are those 130,000 carbon copies? Are they in a box? Are they in?
Madam Chair,
In a mine?
Mr.
I'm
Zilli.
thinking that
Mr. Zilli,
I'm sorry,
I'm going to remind you again to go through the chair.
Madam Chair. Representative, I believe they're in a box, but I can verify and answer later where they are. I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Dibble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to help answer Senator Barr's initial question, foundational question to Chair Zelli. I have a different memory of both the estimates and how the price of the cost of the project has increased. And I think it's well documented in the series of legislative audit reports and investigations and evaluations that we have in our files. First of all, the estimates prior to the full funding grant agreement was substantially less than $2 billion. I'll concede that it was around $2 billion at the time of the signing or the granting of the FFGA, but that was after we had seen substantial repeated kind of every few months increase in the estimate of the project for a variety of reasons. Unlike, I think, the characterization that we heard, major components of the project were well known at the time of the contracts, not the least of which were, the wall, an extra station, some other major elements, and elements that were identified as coming up as a surprise should not have been a surprise because the public had been stepping forward for years, pointing to potential problems with soils, with conditions, with nearby impacts, et cetera. I'll further add that those major components that were included later were included without the benefit of competitive bidding. We're just simply swept in, and the prices then that were originally estimated, and that's part of what the table reflects, were priced differently, and those prices were accommodated. Plus, we have many, many instances of documented mismanagement of the schedule, of controls over the schedule within the contract, of contingency and planning for contingency, of distributing and managing risk, managing change orders, et cetera. So that's the more thorough response to how we got from well below $2 billion to pushing $3 billion and a facility that should be open by now that's now not going to be open for 2 years.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Jaskowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Zelli, you mentioned earlier about the change orders and the really incompetence of the agency in coming up with the estimates, that you now have somebody from MnDOT who's good at this. And it mentions that on page 2 of your letter, that you've got a new cost estimating consultant was hired, improving the process of preparing realistic construction estimates for the work to be performed. So that's supposed to help us think that, well, in the future, it's solved now. So this person knows what they're doing. So the person that didn't know what they were doing, do they still have a job with you?
Mr. Zelli?
Madam Chair, Senator, it is really essential, and we know this, but it was helpful to hear from our MnDOT partners and a peer review to really look closely at the independence of a cost consultant. The previous cost consultant was part of our design engineering firm, and we want true independence to ensure that they are actually more accurate and unbiased from any relationship with either the contractor or the design engineers. So we have a new consultant process to ensure that we are getting objective and thoughtful data.
Senator Jaskowski?
Madam Chair, I didn't understand what he said. So Mr. Zelli, so did you have an employee or a consulting firm that was doing the cost estimation work? And the MnDOT person or people that you brought on to do the estimating work, what capacity are they in now? Are they an employee or are you somehow consulting with MnDOT, with government? What did you do with the people that were failing us here? Did you send them down the road somewhere or not?
Mr. Zelli?
Madam Chair, Senator, just to clarify that the MnDOT peer review was a process to understand and look at not just individuals, but how we actually manage the process. The consulting firm was replaced by another firm to do better estimating and have more objective estimating. So it isn't just a question of individuals, although yes, there is a different individual who is the lead person. Do you want to add anything?
Mr. O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, thank you for the question. AECom was the original independent cost estimator. They no longer are the independent cost estimator on the project. After working with MnDOT, per the letter as you described, HNTB became the independent cost estimator as a part of this project. We've had better results on the project since that change.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Coran?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chair Zelli, I too was not surprised. Of this last third or fourth OLA report, that there are just a lot of holes in their basic project management. But what I bring to this table is, this is my 40 plus years in government contracting on both sides. And I think what we're continually seeing is, I love you, great, pat yourself on the back a lot today. This project started out, almost a decade prior to 2013. The 2013 estimate was actually $1.3 billion. And so a couple years later with the additional work, and I think almost all major issues have been identified from the very beginning, and decisioning drew into it. I also think the business rules and requirements are what contractors live off of. And the change order process or the original contracts are the greatest way to abuse government. I've seen it. That's why I've worked extraordinarily hard to revise our procurement processes in the state. We don't do a very good job because we don't know our job very well. At the detail level and in the complex decision-making decision trees for these types of projects, whether it be IT or whatever it is. I know your agency hasn't done anything to change their methodologies. The state hasn't done anything to change the methodologies. And I think what we see here is a continued migration to a cost that is a recognition that we didn't know, even having a decade and a half to work on it prior to the beginning of where we think we're ready to issue an RFP. And then you throw in, well, we made some decisions that changed those. Yes, you did. But you make them without any regard to the citizens of Minnesota. Right? It should have been opened a year ago. What I still don't have any comfort in is that you guys actually have hired the best and the brightest. I think everybody is likely still employed that started on this project, and the key decision makers are still employed. You lean on MnDOT, for which you had a little bit of experience with, I believe. And it's probably where the project should reside. I don't think the citizens of Minnesota have comfort enough to allow, if they had a choice, to allow Met Council to take on another rail project or continue the ones you've already started. There has been nothing that's comforting in the report or your actions or your acknowledgement that this migration from a project that was $1.3 billion, now almost $3 billion, and to say, wow, we got great value. In fact, we're gonna compare ourselves to other ineffective government to justify our success on a cost per mile. These numbers are beyond comprehension for the average citizen. If we have this many concerns to the original construction of it, I have grave concerns about the cost. Every single one of these projects is a massive cost in ongoing maintenance upgrades, and what is still yet to be identified when this thing starts rolling. And you know, there's no budget to rebuild this, continue to rebuild the existing infrastructure. It likely won't meet your estimated utilization goals, since almost 2 generations of people have been born since this project has started, and there's been massive transformation in the workforce. I don't have any comfort. I'd love for one of you guys, a chair, a commissioner, somebody to come to the table and say, how do we do it differently? and it's actually retraining the entire workforce, for which no one has done. Until we do that, we're going to see all these, we'll justify it and feel better, an IT project, bridge project. You look at your description of how you went about every change order. Everybody was in the room is what you described. Yet our estimates were way off. So either we didn't know the needs, because you are the agency who determines the exact requirements for each of these change orders. Every single one of them. You can't blame it on anybody else. You can blame it on a consultant. They work for you. You are the decision maker. And yet these great differences continue to go. We always land on the other side because I think the contractors at the end of the day profit off of, and I'm not going after McCrossin or anybody, but they can profit off of the lack of knowledge of the decision-making process and the ability to articulate the business need in every facet. And so you then have no basis to go back and to counter their arguments in any meaningful way, and you're always going to end up near where they've determined that cost. So with that, I think Senator Dibble and I, we all would like to see the projects probably be removed politically from Met Council, put them back in MnDOT, and because I do know they do peer review, so I give them credit for that. And they actually take their advice. It's ironic that now the only reason you're doing it is because on your third rail project is because of the pressure that these reports are brought to you, and that's why we're here today. So I would hope we will all gather to have more legislative strength. Maybe the executive body at some point would step in and stop this, but I don't think they intend to today. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Correa.
Madam Chair.
And
And Senator, I take your comments at heart. I want you to know, and those of the committee, that we're here to fairly represent the condition of both the project and how we are actually admitting, acknowledging the faults and the areas that need to be addressed. As an example, not just with OLA oversight, but just our own peer reviews and conversations, we have dramatically changed the form of our contracting for future projects. We're definitely in a process of continuous improvement. So it's really important for you as a legislator and others to understand with greater specificity our commitment to prudence, to the integrity of the project, to the effectiveness, and that does with continuous changes. So I'll be the first to admit the areas and acknowledge the recommendations from the OLA, which were given in good faith, and we acknowledge them and actually respond to them with changes. We have done every step of the way. The initial, and it wasn't initial, but the $1.3 billion estimate was before there was actual contract signed, because that was probably before the co-location with a freight rail, which substantially changed the scope and the process and the cost of the project. So there were different costs along the way that were, but it was a different project. And it was not Met Council's first choice to have co-location with a freight rail, but that's what happened. So I'm happy, and I know that over time we can continue to both receive feedback, make those changes, make additional improvements. But I think actually the form of our contracting, our procurement policies, is a great example of how we have learned and continue to find our best steps toward prudence.
Senator Correa.
Madam Chair and Chair Zelli, you do an amazing job at redefining the problem for which Met Council has owned since day one. And so as you define it, well, you know, the 1.3 billion was prior to you making more additional decisions and changing the scope of the project. Yes, it's very different. Kind of my very point. The business community or the contracting community can always count on you changing your mind. And because there's no cost pressures to keep the containment or containment, because you've got an unlimited pool of money. But for you to describe it as if Met Council didn't have any role in it, the 10 years prior to 2013, when this project had a 1.3 estimate, years and years. And I think at that point, I think the number was Met Council had spent some $140 million. Hadn't even got to the point where you're ready to issue an RFP. That came 5 years later. You own the entire process. I know you weren't there. Met Council did. owned the entire process from day one, all the alternative routes in the decision-making process, all of those things. So you've owned every one of them, and to continually redefine it and say, well, but we're better now. It's those decisions without regard to the cost containment or even achieving a goal, and the citizens keep paying for it. And that's what citizens are tired of. That's what we are tired of at the legislature, and the constant redefinition of what the problem is for which you've owned since day one in Met Council. So I would like to believe that things will change. I just don't.
Mr. Zelli, we'll allow you the last word, if you will, if you have a final comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I know we have much to acknowledge, and we continue to seek continuing to improve. I do believe that our ability to manage a very difficult, complicated, large project to completion was not easy, but certainly we have learned through this process that we're already bringing to bear on our other transit ways that we're engaged with. So I appreciate the OLA's review, its scrutiny, working with our staff. I feel very good about that relationship and our learnings, and we continue to seek ways to improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zelli, Mr. O'Connor, for giving us your time this morning to respond to the members' questions and criticisms. We appreciate the time that you spend with us. We'd like to thank Ms. Lyson and her staff for the report. I will also, I think all of us have, before we adjourn, we've been sent out the survey of legislators. I think all of us have gotten extra copies to distribute to our colleagues. Would it encourage you to get them in quickly? And they have asked, the OLA has asked that they be returned by tomorrow. So please encourage your colleagues to respond. I don't believe there's any further business. Legislative Audit Commission is adjourned.